The Hogwarts Express chuffed merrily along the rolling green hills, its scarlet engine billowing soft clouds of white steam into the late morning sky. In one compartment near the middle of the train, 4 first-year students sat together, drawn together by equal parts chance and a warm spark of friendship that had ignited almost the moment they'd met. The sunlight flickered through the window, casting gentle stripes across their excited young faces as they chatted and laughed in voices still light with childhood. James Potter had been the first to poke his head into the compartment, his dark hair already untidy from leaning out the train window earlier to wave goodbye to his parents. He wore a broad grin that seemed to brighten the entire space. "Mind if I sit here? Everywhere else is full," he'd said cheerily, though in truth he simply liked the look of the other boy sitting by the window, a boy with longish dark hair and a confident, bored slump to his posture. The boy by the window had looked up, arching a curious eyebrow, then flashed a charmingly mischievous smile of his own. "Go ahead. I'm Sirius Black," he introduced himself in a smooth voice that belied his own excitement. He scooted over to make room. James Potter flopped down opposite him, trunk and owl cage stowed hastily overhead, and returned the introduction. Not long after, a timid knock sounded on the compartment door. A sandy-haired boy with gentle amber eyes peered in, half hidden behind a threadbare sweater. "Excuse me, may I join you?" he asked softly. The corridor outside was loud and crowded with students looking for seats. James immediately beckoned him in with a welcoming wave. "Of course," Sirius added, patting the empty spot beside him. The boy smiled in relief and introduced himself as Remus Lupin as he shyly tucked his worn suitcase under the seat. The compartment door slid open one more time just before departure, and a round-faced blonde boy nearly tripped over his own feet scrambling in. I heard you've still got a spot everywhere else," he panted. Sirius chuckled good-naturedly and helped pull the boy's trunk inside before it could topple. "Plenty of room here, mate," James laughed, shifting to give him space. The newcomer plopped down beside James and introduced himself between breaths as Peter Pettigrew. Soon the compartment was filled with the comfortable noise of new friendship, the rustle of sweet wrappers from the lunch trolley, laughter at Sirius's dry jokes, and exclamations as James showed off a deck of exploding snap cards. As the train journeyed northward, daylight deepened into a soft afternoon glow. The boys spoke of the houses they hoped to be sorted into. "Gryffindor, like my dad," James declared proudly, fiddling with a golden snitch he had secretly brought along, a parting gift from his father. It fluttered between his fingers before he caught it with a wink. Remus offered a polite smile and said any house would be fine, though inwardly he wondered if a place as wonderful as Hogwarts could truly accept someone like him. Peter nodded fervently to James's words, clearly eager to align with the confident, bespectacled boy who had instantly taken on a leader-like air. Sirius leaned back with a casual shrug, but a determined light shone in his gray eyes. "Anything but Slytherin," he muttered, almost to himself. For a moment his carefree facade slipped, and James sensed a hint of pain there. Sirius quickly covered it with a grin. "Gryffindor sounds all right, don't you think?" Every so often, other first years stopped by their compartment or peered in. At one point, a girl with vivid dark red hair and bright green eyes paused at their door, shyly asking if anyone had seen a lost toad. Apparently, a fellow first year had misplaced his pet. Remus sat up to help, always the courteous one. But before he could offer, the toad was found by a Hufflepuff prefect further down. The red-haired girl thanked them anyway, with a friendly smile that made James momentarily forget what he'd been saying. Sirius elbowed him lightly when she departed, raising an eyebrow in amusement. James flushed and snapped his jaw shut, trying to act nonchalant as the others laughed softly. Evening fell as the train neared its destination. Outside the windows, the sky bloomed into a rich watercolor of dusky purples and soft oranges. Eventually, the Hogwarts Express slowed and finally shuddered to a gentle stop amid thick pine forests and a star-pricked sky. The first years spilled out onto the platform of Hogsmeade Station, breath misting in the suddenly brisk air. A great lantern-wielding figure, a friendly half-giant named Hagrid, guided the newcomers toward the Black Lake, where dozens of little boats bobbed gently, lanterns at their prows casting warm halos on the water. "No more'n 4 to a boat," Hagrid called kindly. James, Sirius, Remus, and Peter managed to clamber into the same boat. Remus shivered with excitement and the lingering chill of the evening. Sirius clapped him on the back and pointed ahead. "Look," he whispered. Across the starlit water, an immense castle loomed into view as the fleet of boats glided around a bend. Hogwarts Castle rose atop its cliffs, countless windows aglow like welcoming candles in the dark. The turrets and towers pierced the twilight sky, and the lake reflected the whole spectacular sight in shimmering ribbons of gold and blue. Gasps of wonder drifted from every boat. Remus felt his throat tighten with emotion at the sight, a mixture of awe and the wistful hope that this place might truly become a home for him. Next to him, James's eyes shone behind his glasses. Brilliant, James breathed as the castle lights danced in his lenses. Sirius leaned forward, grinning as broadly as ever, but said nothing for once. He simply drank in the vision of freedom and adventure that Hogwarts represented. Even Peter, who had been nervously wringing his hands, now sat transfixed with a delighted smile. Soon they disembarked and climbed a narrow path up to the castle entrance, hearts pounding in anticipation. Inside the vast entrance hall, the first years gathered, chattering in hushed tones under the vaulted stone ceiling. Through a set of open doors, they glimpsed the great hall beyond. Hundreds of floating candles, and tables full of older students, whose laughter echoed. The ceiling above mirrored the night sky, sprinkled with stars. "It's enchanted to look like the sky outside," Remus murmured to the others, recalling a detail he'd read in a book. His new friends regarded him with impressed smile. Before long, the sorting began. Professor McGonagall, stern but not unkind, called each nervous child forth to sit on the stool and don the patched sorting hat. In turn, each boy watched his new companion step forward. Sirius was among the first. "Back, Sirius," the professor announced. A hush fell. The surname was well known, and more than a few whispers rippled through the older students. Sirius held his chin high, but James, watching from the line, saw his fingertips trembling slightly as he touched the hat. The silence lasted only a moment. Then the hat shouted, "Gr. Findor." Sirius broke into a relieved, radiant laugh as the table decked in red and gold cheered mightily. He strode to join his new house, looking lighter than ever. A few names later came. Evans. Lily. The red-haired girl from the train stepped up. The hat deliberated for a short moment on her head before declaring, "Gryffindor." James couldn't help but smile as Lily, beaming with surprise and joy, headed to the Gryffindor table to applause. He didn't even know her yet, but something about her enthusiasm was contagious. A Lupin Remus was called not long after. Remus cast a quick glance back at James, Sirius and Peter in line, as if worried this moment might separate him from the first friends he'd made. The hat slipped over his eyes, and much to Remus's shock, barely touched his head before it too cried, Gryffindor. A wave of relief and happiness washed over him as he hurried to sit with Sirius and Lily at the Gryffindor table, who both welcomed him with congratulatory grin. Pettigrew, Peter, squeaked Professor McGonagall's voice next. Peter stumbled forward, pink-faced and anxious. The hat took a little longer with him. Peter clenched the edges of the stool, visibly holding his breath. At last the brim opened, and shouted, Gryffindor. Peter let out a whoop of surprise and scampered toward the clapping Gryffindors, clearly overjoyed to remain with those who had shown him kindness. Finally, Potter, James. James stepped forward, head high. He felt the weight of many eyes, some recognizing the Potter name, others simply curious. James had waited for this moment all his life. His heart drummed with excitement rather than fear. The Sorting Hat barely touched his unruly hair before yelling out the house. James had hoped for Geob Fidor. James flashed a triumphant grin and joined his friends amid cheers and claps on the back. Now all four boys were reunited, seated together at the long Gryffindor table under the enchanted ceiling. One of the last names called was Snape Severus, a thin, pale boy with a curtain of greasy black hair took the stool. James recognized him as the one who had been speaking to Lily on the train. The hat considered a moment, and then proclaimed Slytherin. James noticed Lily's face fall slightly as Severus Snape scurried off to the table, adorned in silver and green. But soon the sorting was complete, and a thunderous cheer erupted to welcome the new students to their houses. Plates magically filled with a feast that made Peter's eyes round as saucers. Roast chicken, buttered potatoes, rich stew, and dishes galore. The boys ate heartily, their long day of travel having sharpened their appetites. Between bites, they marveled at the ghosts that drifted by in polite greeting. Remus exclaimed softly when nearly headless Nick, the Gryffindor house ghost, doffed his partially detached head in a cordial bow. Laughter and talk rose in a joyful din under the golden light of floating candles. James and Sirius were soon swapping tales with older housemates nearby, fitting in as if they'd always belonged. Lily, a few seats down, laughed along with a dark-haired girl, and threw frequent, eager glances at the teacher's table, particularly at the tall, bearded headmaster, who beamed benevolently at all the students. That's Dumbledore, Remus whispered to Peter, who nodded, eyes wide with admiration. At the end of the feast, with stomachs full and hearts lighter than air, the first-year Gryffindors followed their prefects through cozy, torch-lit corridors to Gryffindor Tower. The castle was a maze of magic. The staircases occasionally shifted under their feet, drawing gasps and giggles. Portraits on the walls moved and waved. One fat lady in a pink silk dress guarding a doorway greeted them. "Password?" she asked. "Capudraconis," replied the prefect smartly, and to the amazement of all the new students, the portrait swung aside to reveal the round hole into their common room. The Gryffindor common room glowed with the gentle light of a crackling fireplace. It was warm and cluttered with squashy armchairs, and the air smelled of old books and a faint hint of chocolate from a half-open box of cauldron cakes. Someone had left on a side table. James, Sirius, Remus, and Peter climbed the spiral stairs to the first-year boys' dormitory, each step filled with the fading adrenaline of the day. They found a circular room with 5 four-poster beds, one for each of them, and another boy named Frank, who had already begun snoring softly. The hangings were deep red velvet embroidered with gold, and at each bedside stood a small table with a candle lamp glowing gently. The 4 friends changed into their pajamas, each still buzzing with excitement, though their bodies were tired. As they each drew the heavy bed curtains aside, they exchanged sleepy smiles in the quiet hush of midnight, with moonlight peeking silver through the tall windows. James's voice spoke softly from across the room. "We all made Gryffindor. I can't believe we're really here." There was a note of contentment and wonder in his tone. "It's brilliant," whispered Sirius in agreement, folding his arms behind his head as he lay back. All of us together. He felt an immense gladness that he wouldn't be isolated among strangers, or worse, among those who upheld the pure blood values he was already beginning to rebel against. Remus, curled up under his blankets, added in a drowsy murmur, "Thank you for letting me sit with you on the train." It seemed important to him to say, even as his eyes drifted shut. He still half feared it was too good to be true, that he had found acceptance so soon. "Don't be silly, mate," came James's gentle reply through the dim. "That's what friends are for." Peter gave a quiet, affirmative mumble, already halfway to sleep. One by one, their voices faded, and the dormitory fell silent, save for the soft breathing of 5 boys and the occasional pop from the dying fire in the common room below. In the stillness, James peeked once more through a gap in his bed curtains. He could just make out Sirius's canopy across from him, and, on the other side of the room, the outline of Remus's bed and Peter's beyond. A smile touched James's lips. He had a feeling, even on that first night, that this was the start of something extraordinary. 4 young wizards drawn together by fate and chance were now bound by friendship. As James finally closed his eyes, the last thing he heard was the distant hoot of an owl outside, and the comforting thought, "We're at Hogwarts, and we're in this together." The months that followed proved that the bond between James, Sirius, Remus, and Peter was no fleeting train ride friendship. By the time winter settled over Hogwarts in their first year, the 4 had become nearly inseparable. They studied together in the cozy corners of the common room, played exploding snap by firelight, and served joint detentions after a prank or two gone awry. One memorable night, Filch the caretaker caught James and Sirius trying to bewitch suits of armor to recite silly poems. Their punishment of polishing trophies for hours was made bearable only by the 2 boys' whispered jokes and Peter sneaking in a tin of biscuits for them. Remus often looked on with a fond, if slightly anxious, smile. He was usually the voice of caution in their little group, though he couldn't deny he loved their adventures just as much. Hogwarts itself became their playground, with secret passageways behind tapestries to discover, and the lure of the forbidden forest at the edge of the grounds, which they only dared skirt in daylight, for now every day held a new mystery. James, ever curious and bold, revealed to his friends over Christmas that his father had entrusted him with a very special heirloom, an invisibility cloak. When he first produced the silvery, whisper-soft cloak from his trunk late one night, The other boy's eyes widened in disbelief and delight. Under its shimmering fold, they could sneak through the castle unseen, and so they did. Initially for innocent midnight kitchen raids, muffling their laughter as they shared pilfered pumpkin pasties and hot chocolate by the fireplace. After everyone else was asleep, the cloak became their shared secret, a source of endless excitement and whispered midnights. However, not all mysteries at Hogwarts were fun and games. As their second year began, James, Sirius, and Peter started noticing something odd about Remus. Though he was as studious and lively as ever during most of the month, often huddled with Lily Evans in the library trading study tips, or chuckling at Sirius's impersonations of Professor Slughorn in the common room. Remus had frequent, sudden illnesses. Every month or so he would disappear from classes and dormitory for a day or two. The matron, Madame Pomfrey, would solemnly escort him to the hospital wing, citing a severe migraine or a lingering childhood ailment as the cause. He always returned looking drained and a bit bruised, with shallow shadows under his eyes and new scars that he tried to hide. Whenever his friends bombarded him with concern, Remus offered a soft, rehearsed excuse. Just feeling under the weather again, that's all. He forced a smile that never quite convinced any of them. By the time autumn painted the Hogwarts grounds in red and gold during their second year, James and Sirius especially grew determined to uncover the truth. They cared for Remus deeply, and his monthly suffering pained them. Late one October evening, when a pale half-moon hung in the sky, Sirius pulled James and Peter into a quiet alcove of the common room, while Remus was already abed. In hushed voices they compared notes. James had noticed Remus's sick days always coincided with certain times of the month. Peter pointed out that every time the full moon had just passed, a silence fell as the three friends realized the pattern together. "Do you think it's what I think it is?" Peter whispered, eyes wide. Sirius exchanged a grave look with James. They all knew, from wizarding history and whisperings, of one curse that matched these clues: Remus's tired eyes, the secretive trips away, the time. James swallowed, his heart heavy at the thought. A werewolf. The word hung in the air, almost too fantastical to believe, of their gentle friend. Yet it fit to be certain, for it was a grave conclusion to leap to. James and Sirius orchestrated a plan on the night of the next full moon. Under the silvery light pouring through the castle's windows, they roused Peter from sleep and donned the invisibility cloak. Close to midnight, the three of them sneaked out of their dormitory. The castle corridors were deserted and eerily beautiful at night, moonbeams illuminating suits of armor that stood like silent gods. Down staircases and through quiet halls they went, careful to avoid the wandering gaze of Filch or his prowling cat. They waited in a shadowed nook near the hospital wing, hearts pounding. Sure enough, Madame Pomfrey soon appeared, guiding a trembling Remus along. Even from a distance, the boys could see Remus was pale as parchment, sweat beading on his forehead. Despite the cool night, he clutched a book to his chest, perhaps as a comfort before handing it off to the nurse. With worried gentleness, Madame Pomfrey led him onward, past where the hidden trio huddled. James, Sirius, and Peter fell in step silently a few yards behind, hidden under the cloak, following through the entrance hall and out onto the moonlit grounds. The air outside was crisp and smelled of autumn leaves. They trailed the pair across dewy grass until a looming soap came into view. The Whomping Willow, A large tree that stood alone and strangely still at that moment. Every student had been warned to keep well away from its violent thrashing branches. Under the cloaked James, Sirius and Peter watched from a safe distance. Madame Pomfrey took out her wand and murmured an incantation. The boys couldn't hear. At once, the willow's branches shuddered and grew oddly calm, as if frozen by magic. In the silence, Remus glanced around with haunted eyes. James's heart clenched. His friend looked terrified, not of the tree or the night, but of himself. Pomfrey touched a knot on the tree's trunk, opening a gap among the roots leading into darkness. Remus hesitated only a second, then disappeared into that opening. The nurse withdrew, restoring the tree's movement with a wave of her wand. Its branches began to sway and groan again, guarding the secret passage. Madame Pomfrey hurried back toward the castle, passing so near the boys that Sirius had to stifle a gasp. They pressed themselves flat against the ground, hidden as the matron's hurried footsteps receded. Moments later, from somewhere deep under the thrashing willow, a distant haunting howl rose into the night air. It was an agonized sound, lonely and feral. Peter trembled. James felt Sirius grip his arm tightly beneath the cloak. There was no doubt now what they were witnessing. The three friends returned to Gryffindor Tower, silent and shaken. Any lingering doubts were gone. Remus was a werewolf, but rather than fear, what filled their hearts as they lay awake in their beds until dawn was sorrow and determination. Sorrow that their kind, gentle friend carried this terrible burden, and determination to help him, no matter what it might take. The next day, Remus reappeared in classes looking exhausted. New scratches on his forearms that peeked from under his sleeves. As usual, he murmured a quiet apology to the professor for his absence and tried to slip back into routine. By evening, he was curled in a corner of the common room, attempting to read by the firelight, though his eyes kept drooping with fatigue. James, Sirius, and Peter approached him gently once the room had emptied for the night. Most students had retired bed early after a long day, and only the crackle of low flames and the occasional shifting logs filled the hush. Remus looked up in mild surprise as his friends sat around him. The orange glow painted flickering shadows on their faces, solemn and tender. Remus, James began softly, careful to keep his voice calm. "We need to talk." Remus bookmarked his page with a trembling hand. Something in James's tone set him on edge. His heart began to pound. All right," he said quietly. "What's wrong?" There was a pause. Sirius glanced toward the dying fire, then met Remus's eyes. "We know Moony." The nickname slipped out naturally. He'd chosen it that day, half in affection, half in pain. After hearing that forlorn howl under the moon, Remus flinched at the word Moony, a look of alarm flashing across his face. James quickly reached over and placed a firm but gentle hand on Remus's shoulder. "We know it's you slipping away each month. We know why." Remus's breath caught. In an instant his weary face crumpled, all pretenses falling. He opened his mouth, searching for words, denials, defenses, anything, but nothing came. His vision blurred with hot tears he'd kept at bay for so long. At the sight, Peter moved closer, patting Remus's arm reassuringly. Sirius let out a pained sound and, without hesitation, pulled Remus into a fierce hug. "You stupid, brilliant, noble idiot," Sirius murmured, his own voice unsteady. "Do you really think we'd abandon you?" Remus froze in astonishment, then slowly returned the hug, clutching Sirius as though he might vanish. James leaned in, placing his hand atop Remus's in solidarity. "We're your friends, Remus. Nothing, certainly not this, is going to change that," James said firmly, echoing Sirius's sentiment. Peter nodded vigorously, sniffling a little as tears formed in his eyes too. "We're with you, Remus. Always." Remus pulled back to look at them, the firelight catching the wet tracks of tears on his cheeks. You're not afraid of me?" he whispered, voice raw with relief and disbelief. "Of course not," James replied, shaking his head. "You're our friend. You'll always be our friend. And we'll figure this out together," Sirius added, determination burning in his gray eyes. "You won't have to go through these nights alone anymore." Remus trembled, another wave of emotion threatening to overwhelm him. But this time it was not despair, it was an overwhelming gratitude and a kind of fragile joy. He lowered his head, and all four of them huddled close in a tight circle on the hearthrug, arms around each other's shoulders. The fire beside them had dwindled to gentle embers, wrapping them in warmth. For a long moment, they simply stayed like that, four boys, bound by an unspoken promise. Remus's secret, once a source of loneliness and fear, had become a shared burden, halved by the acceptance shining in his friend's eyes. In that peaceful silence, broken only by the soft crackle of coals, Remus knew with certainty that he was no longer alone. That night, amidst tearful relief and many assurances, a new resolve was born among the four friends. If Remus suffered a curse under the full moon, then somehow, someway, they would be there to support him through it. But how? The very next evening, huddled together again, this time with cocoa and treacle tart pilfered from dinner to fortify them. They discussed daring possibilities. "I could lock myself up far away from everyone, like I've been doing. I don't want to hurt any of you," Remus insisted, but his friends shook their heads. They had no intention of leaving him isolated. It was James who hesitantly voiced what they were all secretly contemplating. "What if you weren't alone? Because, well, what if we weren't human when we kept you company?" He exchanged a glance with Sirius, who nodded slowly, excitement kindling. Peter blinked in confusion, then his expression lit with realization. Remus stared at them, not daring to hope. "You mean become an Animagi?" Sirius whispered, a grin spreading across his face as he said it aloud. The idea was audacious. Animagi were wizards who could transform into animals at will. They all knew Professor McGonagall herself was one, having shown her class how she could turn into a tabby cat. But that was a fully grown witch, and learning such magic was supposed to be extraordinarily difficult and tightly controlled by the Ministry. Remus's eyes went round. That's incredibly complex magic," he stammered, shaking his head vehemently. "And illegal to do without registering. You could get in trouble. You could get hurt. Please, you don't have to." "We want to," James interrupted gently. "We've already decided. We're doing this, Remus, for you." His tone was calm but resolute. Sirius reached over and squeezed Remus's hand in solidarity. Peter gulped but nodded with a small smile, determined to contribute despite the nerves fluttering in his stomach. Remus looked between them, chest tight with emotion. He wanted to protest more. It was too great a risk, too much to ask. But the unwavering expressions on his friends' faces stopped him. A warm ember of gratitude glowed within him. "You're all mad," he murmured, wiping at the corner of his eye again. Sirius barked a laugh. Certified, he quipped. But brilliant, don't you think? Remus couldn't help a soft laugh at that, shaking his head in disbelief that he could be so lucky in friends. And so began a secret quest that would consume the next several years of their time at Hogwarts. By day they attended classes, played Quidditch. James had made chaser on the Gryffindor team in his second year, much to his delight, and continued their merry mischief. But by night, or whenever they could steal time alone, the three would-be Animagi pored over advanced transfiguration texts and old spellbooks pilfered from the restricted section, with Remus's clever help obtaining a note from a professor here and there. They practiced tirelessly, inching forward in progress. It was painstaking work, in the quiet of a disused classroom lit by wand light. James, Sirius, and Peter traced complex runes and recited incantations, each attempting to coax forth an animal form from within. Remus supervised when he could, ensuring they followed every safety precaution and theory he could research, though he couldn't help feeling guilty. He was also touched beyond words by their dedication. Many nights the boys trudged back to their dormitory exhausted, their magic spent on yet another failed attempt, only to be up and trying again the next chance they got. Little by little, signs of progress appeared. One evening, in their third year, Sirius managed to transform his hand into a sleek black paw for a full minute, prompting stifled cheers from the others before his fingers popped back into human shape. On another occasion, James sprouted antlers from atop his messy head. He looked so astonished and faintly proud that Sirius and Peter dissolved into laughter, nearly giving them away as they hid behind James's bed curtain. It took a day for the antlers to vanish, and James took to wearing a woolly hat in the meantime, much to Lily's amused puzzlement when she saw him in the common room. Peter struggled with particular intensity. He often felt discouraged that his talents in magic were not as strong as James's or Sirius's flashy abilities. But each time he faltered, his friends rallied around him with encouragement, refusing to leave him behind. Remus spent hours tutoring Peter on the theory, breaking down complicated principles into gentle, patient explanations. Sirius would clap Peter on the back after each small victory, reminding him how far he'd come, and James, ever the inspirational leader, would outline over and over why every contribution mattered. A rat might be small, but it can go places none of us can, Pete. You could scout ahead, open doors from the inside. Don't underestimate yourself. Those words lit determination in Peter's chest, and he persisted with newfound confidence. Finally, in the autumn of their 5th year, the magic clicked into place. On a crisp, cold night, when stars winked through the high windows of their secretly claimed practice room, James stood at the center with Sirius and Peter at his side. Remus hovered near the door, both anxious and hopeful. They had decided it was time to attempt full transformations, all three together, believing their combined resolve might help push them through. With a nod of encouragement to one another, the air hummed with energy as they spoke the incantation they had so carefully memorized and prepared for. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then James doubled over, not in pain, but in the strangest sensation. His body was reshaping, changing rapidly, as if he were clay being molded by an unseen hand. Sirius's form, too, wavered and blurred. Peter squeaked as he shrank down suddenly. Where James had stood now loomed a magnificent stag, tall and proud, with a coat that shone auburn in the lamplight, and a splendid pair of antlers crowning his head. The stag's dark eyes blinked in astonishment, recognizing his friends through a completely new sense of smell and sight. Beside him, a large black dog shook out its shaggy fur, then promptly sat on its haunches, tail thumping exuberantly against the floor. Sirius had done it as well. Padfoot was born, tongue lolling in a joyful doggy grin. And near Sirius's front paw, Peter had transformed into a plump grey rat. Wormtail's tiny whiskers twitched, and he let out an excited squeal as he scampered in a circle before climbing awkwardly onto the dog's back. Remus watched this extraordinary scene, hands pressed over his mouth in awe. A laugh of pure relief and happiness bubbled out of him, echoing in the empty classroom. The stag took a careful step forward, bowing its antlered head toward Remus as if in greeting. The dog trotted over and nudged Remus's knee affectionately with a wet nose, while the rat on its back peeped a tiny greeting. "This is unbelievable. You really did it," Remus whispered, dropping to his knees to throw his arms around the dog's strong neck, burying his face in its fur. Sirius Padfoot gave a gentle woof and licked Remus's cheek. In that moment, Remus's eyes shone with tears of joy. For the first time, the upcoming full moon didn't fill him with dread. He knew that next time he would have his brothers in arms, or rather in paws and hooves, beside him in the darkness. A few days later, when the full moon rose once again over the Forbidden Forest, 4 figures made their way beneath its silver light. Madame Pomfrey, as usual, escorted Remus to the Whomping Willow and secured him in the Shrieking Shack to undergo his painful transformation. But once the nurse was safely gone and a howl rent the night air, 3 uninvited visitors approached the Whomping Willow's base. Under James's invisibility cloak, they slipped through the entrance after pressing the secret knot to paralyze the tree, knowledge they'd gained from their earlier reconnaissance. Within the dilapidated Shrieking Shack, a growling, ivory-fanged werewolf crouched in the shadows, its amber eyes wild with lonely fury. Mooney was alone and dangerous, until suddenly he wasn't. A great stag stepped quietly into the moonlit ruins of the room, followed by a back dog and a tiny rat that scurried along the floorboards. The werewolf snarled, muscles tensing to pounce, until the stag moved gently between the wolf and the dog, drawing the creature's attention. The wolf knew the scent of humans was gone. In their place were these animals, unafraid. He paused, confused, ears flattening. The dog chuffed softly in greeting and lay down in a submissive, friendly posture, tail wagging. The stag dipped its head calmly. Together, they radiated an invitation. "We are here, we are your pack." The werewolf's low growls tapered into whines of uncertainty. Mooney took a hesitant step forward into a bar of moonlight, illuminating his scarred, silvery gray fur. He sniffed at the stag's leg, then at the dog's face inches from his own. Recognition sparked in the beast's eyes, some remnant of Remus's mind sensing beloved friend. In the silence of that night, the werewolf pressed its nose against the black dog's fur, a quiet greeting. Then, with a sudden bound of relief, Mooney sprang past them out of the shattered door of the shack, not to attack or flee, but to run free under the moon as he had never been able to do safely before. Padfoot barked happily and galloped after him on 4 paws. Prongs the stag cantered gracefully, its hooves thudding softly over roots and grass, and Wormtail the rat scurried behind, eventually leaping to catch hold of Prongs's swinging tail and perch atop the stag's back for a better view. Together, the unlikely pack roamed beneath the stars. They raced through the shadowy fringes of the forbidden forest, the stag leaping over fallen logs, the dog and wolf weaving between tree trunks in an exultation of wild freedom. Now and then the wolf Remus threw back his head and let out a howl, but it was a different sound than before. Less lonely, more full of exhilaration, as if calling to his friends. The dog answered with a playful bark, and even the stag tipped back its antlered head to attempt a bellow that came out more like a roar of laughter. The rats scurried ahead on little feet, leading them toward the edge of the Hogwarts lake, where the moon's reflection rippled. There the four creatures paused as one, panting clouds of mist into the cold night air, and gazed across the starlit water to the great castle on the hill that was their home. It was a night of wonder and pure magic. None of them would ever forget. Those hours together in non-human form were some of the happiest of Remus's life. The wolf's urge to attack had been tamed by the presence of his fellow animals. Instead of self-harm and isolation, his transformations became adventures. Of course, precautions were still taken. They kept to the uninhabited grounds and the forest's outskirts, careful not to stray near people. By the time the moon set and dawn's first light brightened the east, the four friends returned to the shrieking shack. The wolf, exhausted but calm, settled there as the strain of the night faded. When Remus returned to human form, he found himself curled up on the dusty floor with a large dog's fur warming his back, and his head resting against the belly of a slumbering stag. A little rat was nestled in the crook of his arm, snoozing soundly. Bruised, yes, and tired, but Remus was far less battered than usual. He felt safe. Madame Pomfrey arrived at first light to retrieve Remus, as she always did. By then, the dog, stag, and rat had slipped away under the cloak back to the castle, where James, Sirius, and Peter reappeared in their dormitory, collapsing into bed just before their alarm clocks would ring. The nurse found Remus sitting on the shack floor, amidst far less destruction than normal, a peaceful look upon his wan face, despite the long night. She didn't know why this transformation had been easier, but she was grateful nonetheless. Remus, of course, knew exactly why. He felt it every time he caught the eyes of James, Sirius, or Peter across the breakfast table in the days after, a secret gleam of shared triumph passing between them. And though they were bleary-eyed and yawning from sleeplessness, the three friends bore their fatigue with pride. They had done. From that month on, the Marauders, as James cheekily began to call their little gang, made the full moon nights their own. With each adventure, they grew more adept at exploring the castle and grounds in their animal shapes without getting caught. In fact, their nocturnal escapades led to even more discoveries of Hogwarts's hidden passages and secrets. It was as if the castle yielded its mysteries to them as a reward for their loyalty and daring. In their animal forms, they could slip out under the nose of Filch or Mrs. Norris with ease. Wormtail proved especially handy. The tiny rat could scuttle into places none of the others could, and he often returned squeaking excitedly about a new hidden tunnel or a shortcut behind a wall. So many nights spent sneaking around with the aid of James's invisibility cloak and their own animal abilities naturally gave birth to another brilliant idea. In their 5th year, when heavy opioid coursework might have otherwise put a damper on mischief, the four friends set to creating something to catalog all their hard-won knowledge. If they could map the entirety of Hogwarts, every secret passage, every trick step and hidden door, and enchant that map to show the locations of people within the castle. It would be the ultimate tool for mischief and for keeping track of dangers when they themselves wandered about. It started with a single blank roll of parchment spread out on a dormitory desk one quiet weekend. By wandlight, Remus taught James, Sirius, and Peter the complex homunculus charm he had researched, which could track moving beings on a drawn schematic. Sirius had a flair for inventive charms work, and figured out how to link that magic with the physical map. Peter, with his small form, took responsibility for sneaking into offices and archives to copy old castle blueprints and class schedules, which they then refined with their own explorations. And James, visionary and meticulous, organized all their inputs, sketching the castle's corridors and grounds from memory and correcting it through trial and error, as Padfoot and Prongs prowled in the shadows, checking passageways against the drawn line. After months of careful development, one spring night the map was finally ready to be brought to life. In the empty common room past midnight, the four of them gathered around the parchment one last time. The fireplace had burned low, and in its gentle glow, they tapped the blank parchment with their wands. Together they whispered the secret phrase they'd chosen to reveal its contents. "I solemnly swear that I am up to no good." Ink blossomed across the page like creeping vines, forming into precise lines and curly scripted labels. Before their eyes, the blank parchment transformed into a detailed layout of Hogwarts. Tiny ink footprints dotted the corridors, each labeled with a name in minuscule lettering. Students, teachers, even Argus Filch roaming near the library. The four boys broke into grins of delight. At the top, in elegant script, unfurled the title they had given their creation, the Marauders map, and beneath it, written as if by four different hands, a playful introduction. Messrs. Mooney, Wormtail, Padfoot, and Prongs, purveyors of aids to magical mischief makers, are proud to present the Marauders map. Remus chuckled at the monikers. He had finally allowed himself to accept Mooney without shame, wearing it now as a badge of friendship rather than a reminder of his curse. Sirius preened and let out a theatrical sigh. "Padfoot, you handsome devil, you've made the map of the century." Peter squeaked with laughter at seeing Wormtail signed on such an impressive magical document, and James beamed, chest swelling with pride at the sight of Prongs, a name that once embarrassed him when he'd sprouted antlers, but now felt like a secret second identity full of strength. They spent hours that night testing the map's features, watching dots labeled with familiar names, moving along hallways, spotting when Professor Dumbledore left his office for a late-night stroll, or when little first-year Elijah Macmillan sneaked to the kitchens for a snack. The magic held, with a touch of a wand and the words "mischief managed." They wiped the ink away to hide the map's secrets, leaving it an innocent blank parchment once more. Four pairs of eyes met in mutual triumph. This was their legacy, they knew, a piece of their friendship made magical and permanent. "Forever the Marauders," James whispered, and his friends raised imaginary glasses in toast, their hearts brimming with accomplishment and the warmth of camaraderie. They had done so much more than any student was ever expected to do at Hogwarts, and they had done it for the sake of each other. But even as the Marauders celebrated their accomplishments, not all was well in their 5th year. The strain between them and Severus Snape had only intensified. Snape's curiosity about Remus's condition had grown dangerously keen, and his resentment toward James and Sirius festered with each prank and duel between them. He spent more time in the company of Slytherins, who dabbled in the dark arts, students like Mulciber and Avery, much to the concern of his childhood friend Lily. Lily Evans had her own falling out with Snape. She could not abide the cruel jinxes his new friends cast on classmates. One dark incident against a girl named Mary MacDonald had horrified Lily and opened her eyes to the path Snape was choosing. By the time spring flowers bloomed on the grounds that fifth year, Lily and Snape's long friendship was hanging by the thinnest of thread. Then came a sunny June afternoon after OWL exams, an afternoon that would become infamous as Snape's worst memory, though it haunted James nearly as much in hindsight. The Marauders were lounging by the lake, flush with the relief of finished exams, and feeling mischievous. James in particular, buoyed by some Gryffindor girl's giggles nearby, was twirling his wand and looking for some amusement. When Severus Snape stalked past, alone and scowling, James saw an opportunity to show off. In a flash of poor judgment, he rose, exchanged a glance with Sirius, who gave an encouraging smirk, and with a swoosh of his wand he cast Levicorpus. Snape was caught completely off guard. The spell yanked him upside down by the ankle, sending his wand flying and his robes dangling down over his head. Startled laughter erupted from the bystanders, Sirius's bark-like chuckle loudest of all. James sauntered over with affected casualness, pretending to inspect his fingernails. Having a bit of a problem, Snevolus, he drawled, using the cruel nickname they'd coined for Snape. Peter snickered, and even Remus, who stood off to the side, looked uneasy but didn't yet intervene. Face purple with humiliation, Snape struggled and spat. "Put me down, Potter," but James, emboldened, only swished his wand again so that Snape bobbed up and down in the air. More students in the vicinity were watching now, some laughing, others whispering disapprovingly, and then a flash of red hair pushed through the gathering crowd. "James Potter, put him down now," Lily Evans' voice rang out, high and furious. Her green eyes were alight with anger. James froze, wand faltering. In that second, the spell broke, and Snape crumpled to the ground in a heap, glasses askew and pale with embarrassment. Snape scrambled to his feet, livid and mortified. The watching students fell silent as Lily marched between James and Snape, her expression thunderous. "What is wrong with you?" she shouted at James. "Fancy yourself brave, picking on someone helpless just because you're bored." James opened his mouth, a flush creeping up his neck. This wasn't how he'd pictured impressing her at all. Before he could stammer a response, Snape, seething with resentment and unable to stand Lily defending his enemy, snarled at her, "I don't need help from a filthy little mudblood." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. It was as though time stopped. Lily's face went very white and tears sprang to her eyes, more out of anger and betrayal than hurt. Snape's expression instantly shifted to horror, realizing what he'd just said to his dearest friend, but the word hung poisonously in the air. Lily drew herself up, trembling. "Fine," she whispered, voice cutting and cold. "Consider this the end, Severus. I won't waste any more time on you." Her eyes glistened, and she turned on her heel. Before leaving, she shot James a look of fierce disappointment. "And you're as bad as him, showing off and bullying. Grow up, James." With that, she strode away toward the castle, a hush following in her wake. James stood rooted to the spot, the exhilaration of moments ago entirely drained away. He felt as though he'd been doused in ice water. Around them, the crowd dispersed uneasily. Sirius cleared his throat, trying to lighten the mood, but even he looked troubled by how far things had gone. Remus silently retrieved Snape's fallen wand and placed it on the ground near him before backing away with a remorseful glance, knowing he should have spoken up sooner. Snape had gotten to his feet, shaking with fury and humiliation, dirt on his robes. He cast one pleading, devastated look in the direction Lily had gone, then shot James a look of pure hatred. Without another word, Severus snatched up his wand and fled toward the lake's far side, vanishing into the shadow of the trees. That evening in Gryffindor Tower, the mood was somber. James retreated to a quiet corner of the common room, replaying the scene over and over in his mind with a heavy heart. Lily's stinging words, the hurt in her eyes, and the ugly slur Snape had flung at her. He realized with a sinking heart that his own behavior had set the stage for that disaster. He felt sick with regret. Sirius sat down beside him, offering a half-hearted chin-up mate, but James only shook his head. "No, she's right, Sirius," he murmured. "I was a complete idiot." Admitting it aloud felt oddly liberating and painful at once. Sirius patted his shoulder in solidarity, quiet for one. Upstairs, in the fifth-year boys' dormitory, Remus found James later that night, staring at the ceiling from his four-poster bed, the curtains drawn back. Peter pretended to be asleep, sensing James needed privacy. In the dim light, Remus approached and said softly, "James?" James turned his head. He expected a reprimand. Remus was a prefect after all, but Remus's eyes were full of sympathy. "We all make mistakes," Remus said gently. "What matters is what we learn from them." James sat up, running a hand through his messy hair.
"I've been an arrogant Burke, haven't I?" he sighed. "Hexing Snape like that. I don't even know why I did it. It wasn't brave or funny, it was horrible."
Remus gave a small, sad smile. "I think you do know why. You wanted to impress people. But you're better than that, James. I've seen you be better." He put a hand on James's arm. "Lily will see it too in time. Just give her a reason." That night marked a turning point for James. Humility, an unfamiliar feeling, sank in deeply. He resolved change to become someone worthy of the respect he desired, especially Lily's respect. The days and weeks that followed were tense in some ways. Lily Evans no longer spoke to Severus Snape at all. Their once close friendship had shattered irreparably after that afternoon. Snape himself grew more withdrawn, burying himself among the future Death Eaters in his house and nurturing a burning grudge against James and Sirius. For her part, Lily steadfastly ignored James too, though not with hatred, rather with a sense of disappointment that stung James worse than hexes. He noticed her spending more time with her Gryffindor friends, studying late with Remus, who she felt was the most mature of the lot, and laughing with Mary and Alice. Lily excelled in her OWLs, and professors spoke highly of her. But even in her triumph, she carried the hurt of losing two friends in one day. James channeled his remorse into self-improvement. Over the summer after fifth year, back at home, he often thought of the look on Lily's face and vowed he'd never give her, or anyone, cause to think him a bully again. Sirius, too, found himself sobered by the close calls of that year, nearly killing Snape with the werewolf prank. Though no one but the Marauders and Snape knew, Dumbledore's disappointment had been severe, and seeing James so ashamed had left an impact. Their mischief would continue, but with a bit more care and a bit less malice. That summer brought other changes as well. The war with Voldemort's forces outside of school was growing worse. Dark news filtered in of disappearances and attacks. Sirius's home life, always fraught due to his family's allegiance to pure blood supremacy, reached a breaking point. After a blazing row with his parents over his blood traitor friends and his rejection of everything the Black family stood for, 16-year-old Sirius packed his things and ran away from home. He found refuge at the Potter household, where James's parents welcomed him with open arms and warm hearts. Sirius would later say that was the moment he truly felt free. He left behind the grim halls of Grimmauld Place and embraced the Potters as his own family. James and Sirius spent the rest of that summer like brothers, racing broomsticks in the meadow by the Potter's home, and quietly resolving that they would fight against the darkness their parents' generation now faced. By the time 7th year began, James Potter had undergone a subtle but significant transformation of character. He was still clever, confident, and occasionally cheeky, but there was a new maturity in the way he carried himself. He had been made head boy, a surprise to many, since he had never been a prefect. Dumbledore's trust in him gave James even more incentive to prove himself worthy. Lily Evans, meanwhile, was appointed head girl. When she first discovered who her counterpart would be, she felt a jolt of annoyance. James Potter, of all people, but also a glimmer of curiosity. Professor Dumbledore did not choose lightly. Perhaps she thought James really had changed. Their first meeting in the headmaster's office to receive instructions was politely professional. James was courteous, addressing her as Evans in a respectful tone. Lily found herself noting that he avoided staring at her or making any flippant jokes. In fact, he seemed determined to let his actions speak rather than his ego. Over the first weeks of term, as head boy and girl, they patrolled the corridors together on many nights. At first, their conversations were formal and brief. Lily kept her guard up, and James fought the urge to fill the silence with nervous chatter. But as September wore into October, things began to thaw. One late evening, after escorting a lost second year back to her dorm, James had been exceedingly gentle and kind with the starry-eyed young girl Lily noticed. The two lingered a moment in the empty entrance hall. Lily tucked a strand of her red hair behind her ear and mustered her courage to break the quiet. "I heard about what you did in defense class last week," she said softly. James blinked, worried she might be referring to something troublesome. "What I did?" "You paired up with Dorcas Meadows to practice disarming spells," Lily went on, recalling the sight. "She was struggling, and you let her disarm you over and over until she got it right. You were really patient." James's cheeks reddened slightly. "Oh, that Dorcas just needed a bit of confidence is all. She's really quite talented." He paused, then added earnestly, I'm trying to be more patient in general." Lily gave him a small smile, her green eyes appraising but warm. "I can tell." They stood there a moment, the silence now comfortable. The shadows of their past animosity were beginning to fade. As autumn deepened, Lily found herself genuinely enjoying James's company during their duties. He had a quick wit that he used more often to make her laugh than to mock others now, and James discovered that Lily's laughter was one of the most rewarding sounds he'd ever heard, and that earning it through kindness and humor felt infinitely better than showing off. One blustery November evening, the two heads ended their rounds near the portrait hall to Gryffindor Tower. Most of the castle was asleep. In the dim corridor, Lily turned to James. "I never properly thanked you," she said suddenly, "for what you did in the past." James looked confused. "Thanked me? For what?" "For saving Severus that night by the Whomping Willow," Lily clarified, voice quiet. It was the first time either had openly alluded to the incident. Lily had pieced together enough to know that James had intervened in some dangerous situation involving Snape and Remus. Though she hadn't been told the details, she knew Remus's secret by this point. Having guessed it and confirmed privately with him, she understood James had likely prevented something awful. James rubbed the back of his neck. "Oh, that. I couldn't let him get hurt. I only wish Sirius hadn't." He broke off, not wanting to incriminate his best friend. Lily nodded slowly. They both knew Sirius's recklessness had played a role. "Still, you did the right thing. You saved his life." James met her eyes seriously. "I would never have wanted him killed. Even if we hated each other, that's not who I want to be." A silence fell, but it was filled with understanding. Lily gave James a searching look, as if seeing him anew, and what she saw made her smile gently. "Good night, James," she said, using his first name without bitterness, almost kindly. "Good night, Lily," James replied, heart light. Christmas of 7th year brought the first true joy and levity the group had experienced in some time. Lily and James by then were friends, close friends even, who spent time together beyond their head duties. When the students were preparing to head home for the holidays, James mustered up the nerve to ask Lily if she'd like to visit his parents' home on Boxing Day for a small gathering. To his astonished delight, she accepted. Sirius, who was of course staying with the Potters, spent Christmas morning teasing James about making sure the mistletoe was well placed. Remus, visiting for the new year, simply beamed to see two of his best friends finding happiness with each other. Indeed, not long into the new year, James and Lily's friendship blossomed into romance. It was a gentle, natural progression. An evening of studying together in the common room turned into a midnight conversation by the dying fire about hopes and fears. Lily confessed her worries about her parents and sister back in the Muggle world, with Voldemort's hate spreading. James quietly promised that as long as they was around, he'd do everything in his power to keep her and those she loved safe. Touched by his earnestness, Lily realized how much he had grown from the cocky boy she once dismissed. And James, seeing the trust in her eyes, felt a warmth bloom in his chest that had nothing to do with pride and everything to do with love. When their hands met and fingers intertwined, it felt right. By the time spring flowers blossomed around the Black Lake, James Potter and Lily Evans were inseparable. They strolled the grounds together in the evenings, talking in low, happy voices about everything under the sun. The Marauders welcomed Lily into their circle wholeheartedly. Sirius treated her like a beloved sister, albeit one he enjoyed lightly teasing until she quipped back sharp retorts that made James howl with laughter. Peter was a bit shy around her at first, but Lily's warmth eventually had him chattering easily about a new card trick Sirius had taught him. And Remus perhaps appreciated Lily most of all, seeing how her presence balanced and gentled James, and how kind she always was, offering to help him with head duties on nights he looked tired or inviting him to join her for tea and a chat when she sensed he was down. The Gryffindor common room now often saw the five of them sharing a sofa, Lily curled against James's side as they all planned a post-exam celebration or simply enjoyed a quiet evening of camaraderie. Yet outside the hallowed walls of Hogwarts, darkness continued to gather. The newspapers brought grim tidings, disappearances of witches and wizards who defied Voldemort, mysterious attacks leaving the dark mark shimmering green in the sky. Some students left school to join the fight, or in the case of a few from Slytherin, to join Voldemort's ranks. On more than one occasion, Dumbledore gave somber speeches during start-of-term feasts or end-of-year farewells, urging unity and courage against the encroaching darkness. Seventh-year students like James, Lily, Sirius, Remus, and Peter felt the weight of those words acutely. They knew their generation would soon be called to stand and fight. In those final months at Hogwarts, the Marauders and Lily made the most of the warmth and security that the castle still provided. They won the Quidditch Cup for Gryffindor one last time, with James's spectacular chaser skills and Sirius's fearless beater swings leading the team to roaring victory. After the match, Lily kissed James in front of the entire house as the sunset painted the sky in triumphant gold. A sweet, unguarded kiss that was met with whoops and applause, and which left James blushing scarlet and grinning from ear to ear. It was a moment of pure joy amid troubled times. Soon, any EDTs were over, and their time at Hogwarts drew to a close. On a warm evening after their final exams, the five friends slipped out of the castle one last time under James's cloak. They wandered to their favorite spot beneath a beech tree by the lake. The giant squid sent lazy ripples across the water's surface. Fireflies blinked in the dusk, and the air was filled with the bittersweet scent of summer beginnings and farewells. Sirius stretched out on the grass, hands behind his head, gazing at the first stars. "Can't believe it's all ending," he murmured. "It's not ending," Remus corrected softly, leaning against the tree trunk. "Not really. We're just moving on, and we'll all be together still, no matter what." Lily slipped her hand into James's. "We have each other," she said, squeezing his fingers gently. The simple truth of those words comforted them. Peter nodded, trying to look optimistic even as he dabbed at his eyes with a sleeve. He was sentimental about goodbyes. James cleared his throat and sat up. In the dim light, his face was determined. "Whatever comes next, whatever this war brings, we face it together," he declared quietly. He looked around at his friends, his family in all but blood, Lily at his side, bright-hearted and brave, Sirius, loyal and fierce, Remus, wise and steadfast, and Peter, earnest and devoted. Each nodded in agreement, expressions solemn but resolute. They stayed out long after darkness fell, talking in low voices about joining the Order of the Phoenix, a secret alliance Dumbledore was organizing to oppose Voldemort, about hopes for the future. Sirius joked about getting their own place together now that they'd be free men, to which Remus chuckled and pointed out some of them might prefer to live with their girlfriends, prompting Lily and James to exchange a shy, happy look at the thought of a future home together. Peter talked about wanting to prove himself in the fight as much as any of them. Lily spoke of wanting to ensure the safety of her family and to make the wizarding world a place where no one would be judged for their blood status. Every now and then one of them would grow quiet, thinking of the dangers, but then another would crack a gentle joke or put an arm around their shoulder, and the worry would pass, replaced by confidence in their unity. Finally, when the castle's windows were dark and only the soft hoot of an owl punctuated the silence, they made their way back inside. At the threshold of the castle, James paused and looked back over the moonlit grounds, the forest, the quiet lake, where so many memories glimmered. He felt Lily's hand on his arm, and Sirius pat his back. Without a word, the five of them understood what each other felt: gratitude for the years they'd had, and anticipation for the uncertain road ahead. That night, their last at Hogwarts, they slept little. Instead, they remained together in the common room until dawn's grey light crept through the tall windows, talking softly or simply sitting in comfortable silence, soaking in the last moments of their school days. When the morning came and the Scarlet Hogwarts Express puffed at the station to take them home as graduates, They stepped aboard, not as children, but as young adults, ready to meet a world that would soon test everything they had built together. The years that followed were both heroic and heartbreaking for the Marauders and Lily. Straight out of Hogwarts, they joined Dumbledore's secret resistance, the Order of the Phoenix, determined to thwart Voldemort's rising tyranny. In those desperate times, their friendship only strengthened. James and Sirius, along with Remus and Lily, embarked on dangerous missions to protect the innocent and foil the Death Eaters. Even Peter stood with them at first, though the fear in his eyes sometimes betrayed his inner turmoil. Just a year after leaving school, in a small, joyful ceremony amid the gathering shadows of war, James and Lily were married. Sirius stood as James's best man, wiping away happy tears as he watched two of his best friends vow their lives to each other. Remus and Peter attended quietly from the sidelines, Remus with pride and Peter with a forced smile that never quite reached his eyes. The wedding felt like a bright, warm flame in the dark. Lily in a simple white gown, laughing as James twirled her under a canopy of conjured golden stars. Sirius charming some live music from his wand, and Remus raising a toast to love and hope. In that moment, they were not soldiers or members of the Order. They were simply friends celebrating love. Not long after, Lily became pregnant and gave birth to a baby boy with dark, untidy hair like James and bright green eyes like hers. They named him Harry. In the midst of war, Harry was a beacon of pure innocence and hope. His birth brought a rare moment of unbridled happiness to the Marauders. Sirius was named Godfather, and he swore an oath, half joking but wholly sincere, that he'd always protect his favorite little pronglet, as he affectionately dubbed the child. Remus, while struggling with his own isolation due to anti-werewolf prejudices, visited when he cradling tiny Harry and marveling at how his late nights wandering under the full moon had somehow played a role in bringing this child into the world after all. Without the closeness forged in those adventures, James and Lily's love might never have bloomed as it did. Yet the war escalated. A chilling prophecy reached the Order's ears, suggesting Voldemort would target James and Lily's little son as a threat to his power. In response, Dumbledore urged them to go into hiding. Thus, James, Lily, and baby Harry lived in secret, protected by the Fidelius charm, a powerful spell to conceal their location. Sirius was to be their secret keeper, the one person who knew their hiding place. But at the last minute, believing it the perfect bluff, Sirius convinced them to use Peter instead. Thinking Voldemort would never suspect timid Peter of holding such vital information. In a fateful lapse of judgment, they all agreed. Under the weight of terror and temptation, Peter Pettigrew's courage crumbled. The friend who had once laughed with them under the stars betrayed James and Lily, revealing their hidden refuge to Voldemort in exchange for his own safety. It was a betrayal born of fear, and it set in motion a tragedy none could stop. On a cold Halloween night, Voldemort descended upon the cottage in Godric's Hollow, where the Potters were hiding. James fought bravely, wand in hand, trying to stall the Dark Lord to give Lily and Harry time to escape. But escape was impossible. Voldemort was too swift and powerful. He dueled James and struck him down. James Potter died as he had lived, defending those he loved, unyielding and valiant, to the end. Upstairs, Lily refused to stand aside when Voldemort cornered her and little Harry. With fierce love blazing in her eyes, she begged Voldemort to spare her child, pleading to trade her own life for Harry's. Voldemort, callous and cruel, killed Lily, never realizing that in doing so, he was sealing his own downfall. Lily's selfless sacrifice invoked an ancient, unbreakable magic, a protective charm born of pure love. When Voldemort turned his wand on baby Harry, the killing curse rebounded, tearing Voldemort's own body and powers apart. The cottage roof blew off in a tremendous flash of green light, and then there was silence. Harry Potter lived untouched, except for a lightning bolt scar on his forehead, the only physical mark of the evil that had failed to destroy him. Thus, at just 1 year old, Harry became known as the boy who lived. And Voldemort's reign of terror was brought to an abrupt halt, but the victory came at a heartbreaking cost. James and Lily were gone, their lifeless bodies found in the ruins, arms almost reaching toward each other. Their sacrifice, however, left a shield of deep magic on Harry that would protect him for many years. In dying to save her son, Lily had made Harry untouchable to Voldemort's deadly curse. James's unwavering bravery and Lily's profound love combined to cast a power that Voldemort could not comprehend or defeat. When the news spread, the wizarding world rejoiced that Voldemort had been vanquished, at least for a time. But for those who knew the Potters, it was a day of mingled grief and gratitude. Sirius arrived at the smoking ruins of the cottage that night, grief-stricken and wild-eyed at the loss of his best friends. He found little Harry alive and crying, and for a brief tender moment, Sirius cradled his godson amidst the devastation, tears spilling down his own face. In that moment, he tried to shoulder the role James had left him, to protect this child at all costs. But fate took another cruel turn. Peter Pettigrew, desperate to escape the consequences of his treachery, faked his own death in a confrontation with Sirius, killing a dozen muggles in the process, and leaving behind only a severed finger as proof of his demise. The blame fell on Sirius as the supposed traitor and murderer. Laughing hysterically in shock and agony, Sirius was taken away by Aurors to Azkaban prison, without a trial, condemned for the very betrayal he had tried to prevent. He spent 12 long years there, suffering but surviving on the thin hope that one day he might be free to care for Harry as James would have wanted. Remus Lupin, on that terrible Halloween, lost almost everyone he considered family. Already ostracized by society for his lycanthropy, he now found himself utterly alone. His best friends dead, Sirius imprisoned as a traitor, and Peter seemingly gone in a blaze of infamy. It was a dark, lonely road for Remus in the years that followed. And yet, true to his gentle nature, Remus carried on quietly, living in the shadows, taking odd jobs far below his skill level, because few would employ a werewolf. He avoided forming close bonds, fearing loss and prejudice, but he never stopped mourning James and Lily, nor did he forget the laughter of his school days or the kinship of the Marauders. He kept the old Marauders map tucked away in his battered traveling case, a silent reminder of better times. And what of little Harry? Lily's muggle sister took him in, and though his childhood was far from easy, he grew up safe, imbued with his mother's protection. Harry inherited James's messy hair and talent for Quidditch, Lily's green eyes and generous heart, and something else too, the legacy of all the people who had sacrificed so he could live. As the years passed and Harry Potter came of age to attend Hogwarts himself, the threads of the Marauder's story began to weave into his own. In Harry's time, the threat of Voldemort returned, and with it came the resurgence of old allies and enemies. The Marauders' era, though in the past, cast a long shadow and a guiding light on Harry's path. In Harry's third year, a mass breakout from Azkaban shocked the wizarding world. Sirius Black had escaped, driven by a singular purpose: to protect Harry and set right the wrongs of the past. Though initially Harry knew Sirius only as a feared fugitive, the truth soon emerged. On a moonlit night in the Shrieking Shack, not unlike those nights decades earlier, truths were revealed. Remus Lupin, who had returned to Hogwarts as the best defense against the dark arts teacher Harry ever had, helped expose Peter Pettigrew, who had been hiding in his animagus form as a rat, none other than Ron Weasley's pet Scabbers. Harry learned of his father's true friends and the betrayal that had taken James and Lily from him. In that tumultuous moment when Harry first heard Sirius call him Harry, my godson, with such love and longing, something profound clicked into place. Though he had grown up an orphan, Harry realized he wasn't as alone as he thought. The Marauders era reached forward in time to embrace him. Remus Lupin became a mentor and guardian figure, teaching Harry the Patronus charm to ward off Dementors and sharing stories of James's schoolboy exploits that made Harry's eyes shine. Sirius, once his name was cleared, became not only a guardian, but a beloved friend, a link to the father Harry never knew. In Sirius's impish grins and protective instincts, Harry found echoes of James. Even the Marauders' map found its way into Harry's hands. During Harry's first years at Hogwarts, Fred and George Weasley had nicked the map from Filch's office, where it had languished since the Marauders' own mischief days. Those clever twins gifted the mysterious parchment to Harry, sensing it would aid him more. When Harry first activated the map and saw the tiny labeled dot of Peter Pettigrew slinking next to Ron Weasley, one fateful night, it led to revelations that saved lives and reunited true friends. The map remained one of Harry's most prized tools beyond its practical use. It was a connection to his parents' generation. Many nights, in the glow of his four-poster bed's curtains, Harry would trace the inked footprints labeled prongs or padfoot, moving about and feel a bittersweet comfort, as though his father and Sirius were roaming the halls alongside him. As new dark forces rose in Harry's time, the Marauder's legacy continued to shield and inspire him. The unregistered animagus trick that James, Sirius, and Peter had pulled off, though born out of youthful rule-breaking, ended up playing a critical role in the Second Wizarding War. Sirius's ability to become Padfoot allowed him to escape Azkaban and later to communicate and travel covertly for the Order of the Phoenix. It also provided Harry solace in grim times, as Sirius could accompany him in dog form when caution was needed, offering a furry shoulder to lean on. Remus's experiences as a werewolf and as one of the original Order members made him an invaluable source of knowledge and empathy to Harry. In Harry's 5th year, Remus returned as part of the Resistance, fighting alongside Harry at the Department of Mysteries and beyond. He often looked at Harry and saw not only James's face, but the combined spirit of all the Marauders and Lily, living on in this brave, kind teenager. It gave Remus the strength to keep fighting, even when despair threatened to overwhelm him. Remus did find love of his own in time, Nymphadora Tonks, a spirited young Auror, and though war claimed both their lives in the very end, Remus met his fate with courage, dueling for the world he hoped Harry would survive to lead into light. Sirius Black, dear Padfoot, provided Harry something priceless during the short time they had together, a true family bond. He invited Harry into his home at 12 Grimmauld Place, the Black ancestral house he himself had hated, but reopened as Order headquarters, and made it clear to Harry that they were family. The laughter they shared was the same that had echoed in the Gryffindor boys' dormitory years before. Sirius regaled Harry with tales of James's absurd Quidditch bets, and the time Snivellus found himself jinxed into a bathing suit, earning Harry's shocked amusement and Hermione's mild scolding. For Harry, who had grown up without parents, these stories were treasures, and in the Battle of the Department of Mysteries, when Sirius dueled ferociously to protect his godson, ultimately falling through the veil of death with a final look of pride and love directed at Harry, his last act was giving Harry more time to escape. That sacrifice, too, fueled Harry's resolve to carry on the fight. In the final confrontation of the Second Wizarding War, as Harry stood in the Forbidden Forest ready to face Voldemort, it was the shades of James, Lily, Sirius, and Remus, conjured by the Resurrection Stone from the depths of his aching heart, that walked beside him unseen by all but him, whispering words of courage and love. "We are with you," they assured him. James's ghostly figure had smiled with encouragement. Lily's had given him strength. Sirius's had promised they were proud, and Remus's, ever the teacher, had reminded him that his son would grow up in a happier world because of what Harry would do. Buoyed by the support of those lost but not gone, Harry Potter fulfilled the destiny that had been set in motion by the sacrifices of the generation before. He defeated Voldemort not with a more powerful curse, but with the power of love, loyalty, and the willingness to lay down one's life for others, the very qualities the Marauders and Lily had embodied. When peace was finally restored, the story of the Marauders became a cherished legend, passed among those who knew how all the pieces had connected. In the Hogwarts headmaster's office, a new portrait of Dumbledore often softly told inquisitive young minds about the brave troublemakers he once disciplined with a twinkle in his eye. In the Gryffindor common room, sometimes a first year would swear they saw the brief shimmer of an antler or the swish of a spectral tail near the crackling fire, though the older students just smiled knowingly and attributed it to overactive imagination. The Marauders lived on in the hearts of everyone touched by their story, most especially in Harry's. He kept the Marauders' map safe, and, in time, passed it down to a new generation of Weasley pranksters, ensuring that the spirit of mischief and righteous daring would never die at Hogwarts. He honored Sirius's memory by naming his first son, James Sirius, blending the names of the two rebellious, big-hearted rascals who had meant so much to him. And every time Harry conjured a Patronus, a magnificent shining stag, he remembered his father and felt James's love guiding him still. Late at night, if one wanders the quiet corridors of Hogwarts, they say you might feel a friendly, unseen presence. Perhaps it's the faint echo of Padfoot paws on stone, or a brief gust as if antlers just passed by. Maybe it's a flash of laughter on the edge of hearing, or the sense that someone's watching out for you just around the next corner on a lonely walk back from the library. The castle remembers the Marauders and Lily, their youthful joy, their secret adventures, their unwavering friendship. Their legacy is etched into every hidden shortcut and the very magic that hums in the school's air. And so, the tale comes to a close like a softly shut book at bedtime. James, Sirius, Remus, Peter, and Lily, the Marauders, and the girl who completed their circle, left an indelible mark on the world. It was their courage and love as much as their mischief and maps that shaped the fate of the wizarding world. Their story ended in sacrifice, but also in hope, carried forward by the boy they protected. As one chapter ends and another begins, we remember that love and friendship can transcend even the darkest of times. The Marauders' footprints may fade from the map, but they will never fade from the hearts of those who knew their story. In the quiet of the night, one can imagine them still, four young friends and a red-haired girl beneath a silvery moon, laughing and whispering as they explore secret passages by wandlight, forever at home in the halls of Hogwarts, and forever watching over those who carry on their legacy. Mischief managed.